I'm delighted to have our poet with us tonight in a rescheduled reading. Jessica was raised in Vermont in the Northern Kingdom, and she received a master's in Italian literature from Stanford University before settling in Portland with her husband Will and their son. She's taught for many years in various programs throughout the Northwest Writing Institute, Portland Community College, and literary arts writers in the schools. Her poems have appeared widely in numerous journals, including Poetry, The Southern Review, and Willow Springs. And her first book of poems, Last Apples of Late Empires, was published in 2009 by Airlie Press. It was one of the first publications by Airlie Press, which is a publishing collective of which she is one of the founding members. Oregon poet laureate Pauline Peterson said of this book that her poetry offers us fruits picked from oracular night, gleaned from daytime sunlight orchard. Her musical, sensual poems evoke the voice of a loving mother and wife. Would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Jessica Lamb. Jessica.
Thank you, Tom. I'm just so happy to be here, not home in bed with the flu. I understand I have the distinction of being the only poet over these 4 years to have canceled due to illness. I thought we were such a fragile bunch of people, we poets, but no. Thank you all for coming. Here's a September poem to start us off. The Shape of Stillness. Mid-morning, September, all the spiders in the centers of their webs. Singing from the neighboring house, the widow with young twins. Sabbath, windows wide open, last burst of late summer, the peppery smell of nasturtium. As if a call went out, all spiders to the center. That fast, they ceased their frantic repairs and took their stations. Small plane motoring the blue air, a mower making its rounds, chittering of chickadees, a swarm of butterflies like leaves falling up, and more melons racing to over-ripen, black larvae rolling in the kitchen waste, last chance to mend the roof leaks, and still singing, plaintive singing from the house next door. They do not move, even in the afternoon, when the breeze becomes a wind. So I thought what I would do is read about half poems from the book, Last Apples of Late Empires, and then new work. How long do I have, Tom? About 40 minutes, is that what you said?
45 minutes.
Okay.
Then we have a
Great.
Q&A period, which could be short or long, depending on the questions.
Okay. Short is always good. And how's the volume? Pretty good? All right. I'm going to start with the first poem in the book, which is called The Voyage Out. And if any of you here are Virginia Woolf fans, you'll recognize that title as the title of her first novel, published in 1915. Every summer I teach a writing workshop with high school students, and the students were all asked to bring a favorite book or a book that's been important to us. And this last summer I brought Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, and I was so struck reading it again by how much her language had infused my writing, not to mention her themes. So, The Voyage Out. Inside the cell of a stopped car, without a warning flare, she comes unfastened from her life. When the light turns, he drives on as though she is still the woman who rose from his arms that morning, leaving on the pillow a strand of silver hair. It is late, the streets are empty. The whole way home she is no one. If he spoke, she might come back, but he doesn't, satisfied with the meal, the wine, the thought of her beside him. He pays the sitter, locks up the house, looks in on their sleeping child. The moon shines through a fog. Come to bed, he calls to her softly. It seems a small thing, not being the woman she was, almost forgivable, his never knowing. So the somewhat mystifying title of the book appears in the next poem I'm going to read. So if you still have questions about it later, I'd be glad to answer them, or try to. This is a longer poem called Night Feeding, and I'm just going to read sections 3, 4, and 5. I discovered that at one point I was thinking of calling the book Night Feeding. I discovered that two of my favorite poets, Muriel Rukeyser and Yvonne Boland, both had books called Night Feeding. Or I think Muriel Rukeyser has a poem called Night Feed, and actually Yvonne Boland's first book was called Night Feeding or something to that effect. So I was glad I had chosen another title, but this poem remains, Night Feeding. On the third night, the milk comes, streaming over the bed to the floor, where first a pond forms, then an inland sea. He wakes me with his fists, tense mouth rooting for the spout. I see wings skimming the moonlit milk pond, beak sucking up my white blood. As he drinks, the sea keeps filling and filling. I dream I'm falling asleep, dreaming of falling asleep. And this way, my spirit slackens deeper and deeper, drifting light as milkweed through the marsh reeds until dawn, when he wakes me again, hooks me with his tongue and hangs on. The beach freezes and thaws. The woods are a deathly still white-sheeted room, a hum with disembodied sounds, prowling of tomcats, beaks hammering trunks, the furtive hiss of smugglers passing along the night's goods, last apples of late empires. Across the border, small ravenous lips take hold. Dusk, there is no suffering here. Tulips hold the last light in sprawling yellow cups. From the kitchen, the sound of rinsing. Each bone settles into its nest of muscle. The lungs begin their night rounds, drawing the darkness in, then doling it out again, warmed. One of my lasting favorites in the book happens to be a poem that I didn't actually write. It's a poem that I found. And I lifted it right out of a 19th century newspaper that I found in the belongings of my great aunt after she died. And she lived in Connecticut near Groton. The Center Groton Record. Carl Bradley, who has been very ill, is slightly better. Everett Chapman and wife spent Sunday in Ledyard. John Goss has been putting up ice with a gang of 30 men. A year ago, he didn't put up any. Lyman Guard is cutting about 20 cord of wood on the Kopp farm. Mr. Carter is putting up a woodshed west of his house. The Norwich and Worcester Railroad Company have voted to extend their line to Groton, so look out for the engine when the bell rings. Judson Burroughs is suffering from poor health. Simeon Gallup has closed his singing school. I love that just little slice of ordinary life. You know how William Stafford said, you can sometimes just cut off a piece of that and call it a poem. Here's a poem that was really just a gift. Not to say I didn't have to work it, but it arrived as a gift, and I think of it as a gift. And it's called As It Was Given. Every afternoon while the other boys played stickball in the park, Bill and his father and brothers sang barbershop quartets. The signal to begin was a resiny hum from the cellar where Dad stirred house paint for the next day's job. Soon they'd be standing in a huddle, harmonizing. The old man would toss out a few words to hang the music on, and before long a sound would appear overhead, the purest overtone, like, here Bill paused in search of the right analogy, like a golden donut. This was how he grew up, listening for the golden donut. It didn't matter that no one else seemed to hear it thrumming. Every so often, he says, it still hovers overhead for an instant, singing or no singing, then just as suddenly vanishes. A few minutes on the front stoop. The Weekly World News reports a fallen angel was found unconscious in a pig pen in Iowa, struck by lightning. And a man ruined his flying carpet by machine washing it. Thank God for the rain, Myron says, walking past with his sheepdogs, keeps the moss growing on our backs. An aphid crosses my page, dressed in this year's hot new color. A hummingbird shakes the pink rose, flees in a shower of petals. Humble brown moth sucks what nectar a dandelion has to offer. I'm having a writing retreat, I explain to my neighbor. She offers her husband in case I need to lift anything heavy. Here is another retreat poem. This one, I spent a month at the wonderful Caldera residency up near Sisters, and did a lot of writing from which I gleaned about 2 poems that I've kept, but this is one of them, called The Clearing. Of all the nerve making music in an empty house, no one can hear me but the dust. Each night I wash a single bowl. Each morning I forget, what is it I'm supposed to know? Overnight, a hole has opened in the road. At the edge of the field, a boulder holds its seat in shade. The raven takes leave of its night branch in the pine. Beyond reach, my garden erupts into bloom. Longing floods me. Infinitely deep, the lake of joy, the lake of grief. Rain at dusk, the long day's loneliness widens and stills. Sleep comes and breathes the whole length of my body, tracing invisible affinities beyond number and name. In night's enormous mind I hold the whole of calculus, and still there is room for the moon. The brief version. We stood in the middle of Route 5 near midnight, just outside of West Burke, and got to know each other. Do I know you? Aren't you all of the above? Yes, 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 yes. Then we kissed. Crickets, new-mown hay, dewy blacktop, lips, lips, tongue, lips. That sufficed for speech, for years. I have a couple of poems in the book that are, I call them National Geographic poems, because they were directly inspired by reading National Geographic. This one is called Holocene Dream, and you can follow it without knowing anything about geology, but I like to give my little tiny geology talk before I read it. So you know the Holocene is the era we're in now, and it comes from the Greek words which mean entire, olos, and kainos, which means new. So the idea is this is an entirely new age. And it's dating from about 10,000 years ago, the end of the Pleistocene till now. Some people are proposing we should change that name to the Anthropocene because of the clear effects that are becoming so apparent of the impact of our species on geology and ecology. So this article in the National Geographic was about the Permian extinction, which was the biggest extinction. It happened about 250 million years ago, and this is really astonishing. It killed 96% of marine species and 70% of land species, and it took 30 million years for vertebrates to bounce back from this extinction. I mean, it really blows open your view of what life is when you think in terms of that span of time. So, Holocene Dream. I lay in the crook of his arm as he read on and on in lulling tones, till sleep eclipsed me wholly, a gust of ether and a puff of ash, marking the place where I had drowsed, attending to prehistory. I slept through all the ages, calamitous eruptions, apocalyptic floods, several mass extinctions. When I awoke, it was autumn. All the familiar furnishings were there. Garden crows haranguing a murderous cat. Jurassic dump trucks rumbling past, brimful of igneous rock, bound for Fairway Meadows estates. Smell of soggy arborvitae with a hint of perfumed laundry soap venting from the neighbor's dryer. I remembered nothing of my dreams, nor did I recall what caused the living world almost to end before I could come into it, to claim my share, or, given half a chance, to claim more. It's interesting to me, this is my first book ever, but the relationship you have with a book after it comes out. There's a lot of fairly serious poems in this book. I had some friends over the other night, new friends, and I made some cocktails which wound up being a lot stronger than I realized. And one of these new friends got pretty lit on my cocktails, and she wanted to see my book. And I brought it out, and she opened it up, and she started reading the poems out loud, laughing hysterically at all of the serious poems. And, at first I was a little taken aback, and then, I just got into it, and I loved it. That feeling of you take yourself so seriously, and then someone just comes along and sees the complete humor in everything that you... So I'm glad I got through reading from my book without cracking up. And now I'm definitely not going to crack up. I'm going to read some new stuff. It's warm in here, or maybe it's just me. So, sleep and sleeping and the difference between sleeping and waking is a theme that comes out a lot. And this is a poem that, it's actually not a new one, but it's one that didn't get in the book. And I like to read it. Can everyone still hear me, or am I starting to... Okay. The Sleep Eater. Night after night, without knowing, she fries up eggs and dreamily eats them. In the morning, she wakes to find a pile of orange rinds and shortcake crumbs, scattered shells and crusts of a lingered-over midnight brunch. Once, she left herself a shopping list, creme fraiche, truffles, mortadella, and an empty pint of prickly pear gelato. It was then she began to fear in earnest, she writes the doctor's advice column. Before last week, she'd never even heard of half this stuff. No reason to worry, Dr. Donahue replies reassuringly. You're not crazy. We call you sleep eaters. Lots of you out there stirring a nocturnal cream sauce. You're probably overstressed and ought to see a specialist. He doesn't specify which kind, as if it should be obvious. But it doesn't matter. Soon after, the brunches abruptly end. Carton of eggs remains intact. Jalapeno sorbet sits undisturbed in its cave of frost. And just like that, she's gone. This second self with fierce and secret hungers. Who can know where she will go to feed? Or whether in vanishing she means to say, I've found my fill. Whatever it was all I need. Five from a marriage. I'll just pause between the sections. Why do you assault me with banalities, I demand. Gruffly he responds, you're my wife and also my friend. Crying a little, I have to admit it's true, at least the wife part. But haven't you agreed, I rejoin, to defend my solitude? He frowns, conceding he might try harder, and we fall quiet, slipping closer on the old couch, though I suspect he can't be trained, and he must know by now that I will not. What is the meaning of this hand, I ask, as we sit on the steps of the Unitarian Church, waiting for the lecture on nonviolent communication? It's feeling the contours of your thigh, he replies, though to me it feels heavy, placed there as if to say, this is mine. I've stopped wearing my wedding ring, I announce. He takes my hand tenderly. What does it mean? I want a new symbol, I explain. He's silent for a moment. Like what, he asks. A hat? He gave me the pearl earrings I once admired, though never thought of owning. When I wear them, my ears throb, and I feel like a rich man's concubine. We pass a grandmother begging, and we don't stop, don't even look at her. For the first few days, I think I'll return the earrings and give the money away. Then it occurs to me I could keep them and donate a matching amount. Finally, after a week, they begin to feel almost deserved. My ears have stopped throbbing. Watching him lift his boat into the river, I don't offer to help him. I sit on the bank bent over my page, pretending to be absorbed in something important, lifting each heavy word into line, crossing the T's, dotting the I's. Later, when his back is sore, I rub it with liniment and scold him for trying to do everything himself. I want to feed him this plate of dirt. It's not the world's richest, ripest dirt. It's humble duff from under the rhododendron. I dug it up for him because I see he is unhappy, standing at the window looking out at the cracked sidewalk. I bring it to him saying, taste a mouthful, you who used to call yourself a farmer. Taste this and tell me what's missing that matters. The gnat, G-N-A-T. Once, when I was too depressed to feel much of anything other than a thick, deadening sadness, I dreamed I loved a gnat. The gnat I loved wasn't even an especially handsome or talented specimen, the commonest bug you ever saw. But my love completely engulfed me. When it came close, 1,000 microcurrents trembled, And I knew without needing any visible sign that the gnat loved me back, loved me, when he could have loved anyone. I felt such happiness out of all proportion to my love's minuscule wingspan, as if the whole world's boundless delight in itself were pouring down through a pinhole and filling me to overflowing. Me so small, so sure I would always be alone. All I have to offer. If you want, I can make you a rough sketch of my huge ignorance, zigzagging randomly over the page before trailing off into blankness. If you've ever wondered what a broken line looks like as it strains to become an honest-to-God circle, I have a short animated video in black and white. For the blind, I can offer a rustic song with flutophone solo, or here, a searing drop of salt water from the limitless ocean of my ignorance, which meets up with your own vast ocean and covers the whole luminous globe with blue water becoming dark as it deepens, too deep to draw or sound, so deep it doesn't even know it is ours. Wanting. The man wants what he wants. He wants his woman to want what he wants, which she does until she doesn't. When she stops to ask herself, she knows the one thing she really wants is no more wanting. If it makes her happy, he'll join in for a taste of that too, but only a nibble. For the real meat, he wants a bigger house, more room for the master bed. He works on the plans. Come on, he says, you know you want it. What woman wouldn't? But she's full of this longing for nothing. For a while she lets him feel he's giving it to her, so they can go on pretending to be satisfied. She came to me. She came to me in the dark saying, I am your sister, and I had no choice but to know her. Sponger of sloughed skin and blood, wiper of shit-smeared ass, your pretty self-sickening backside. Have you forgotten my name? Touch me now with your right hand. I did as I was told, her smell foul but her skin warm. Now give me back your burdens, she breathed. I slept then, waking to light rain sweetening the grass. Open up. I think I hear a knock. No, I am sure. It wakes me out of deep sleep, wakes me from the inside. Out of politeness, I hurry to the front door, throw it open, ready to respond, give aid if required. You can see I am not the mother of soldiers. My family safe within walls, and I am used to that. No one is waiting. There is nothing at all surprising about this morning. The next day, again, quite audibly, though my husband who sleeps lightly doesn't stir. Who is so determined to wake me? I don't know how to find the door in the center of my head. I flail around seeking some way out. Pulse of blood against cranial bone. Whoever you are, teach me how to speak to you. Today I am already wide awake when your knock comes, deep within me, far outside of time. The loner. Some days the English language is a sad machine. like the loaner car I drove away from the discount body shop after my rear window was broken and my purse snatched. What a joyless ride. It smelled of stale smoke, and the windows wouldn't roll down, and I'd been slumping along for all of 5 minutes when a squealing sound erupted from under the hood. At first I thought it was an alarm, maybe to signal the shop I'd gone beyond the strict mileage radius. So I pulled over and sat there for a while, staring out the dirty windshield until I remembered, fan belt, damn it. There are days like that. The mountain looms in the distance. You limp back to where you started, park the car in the yard, leave the keys in the ignition, and go back to your real business, making of your humble life a more worthy vehicle. How's everyone doing? I don't have a lot to say about these new poems. I'm just going to read them to you with no intro. Build here. To be happy, says the old Nepali woman, you have to have a house, a field to sow corn, and an ox. As I make summer at the end of a full day, I think of her, a face in a book I saw at the library. We just live to eat, she said, and time passes by. I had a dream, but no one came to take me away. All my life, when I thought I was awake, I was really in a deep sleep, believing I am this body, this package of pain and pleasure. Here I am, and here's my stuff. Now I feel like I'm swimming through murky waters toward my own forgotten self. Later in dreams, something big is about to happen, but no one comes. Build your house here, said the prophet. All my life I've been looking, is this the place? Is this? Now I have no house, no field, no ox. I have no mission except waking. Instead of speaking. Leaving a dream, there is never a door, you just arrive. And maybe it only seems I've been gone a long time, my ancient harp hung up in a towering tree, the merest seedling when I fell asleep. Such a distance I've come to be met with clouds, double-paned windows, flesh and ribs. My husband rolls over and inquires if I love him, and I take a long moment to study my answer before delivering it. The truth is I don't remember who I am or what I love. But that's a lie. The real truth is I don't dare to take the form of what I know. The wind works all morning bringing on the next rain. It's a heavy one and requires a lot of strenuous pulling. When it comes, I feel softer. The leaves have mostly fallen, deep quiet in the dim house. I am just waiting here for the truth to come tearing through and sink its teeth into my heart. I think yes. This is a teaching poem from my years teaching poetry with fourth graders. It's called Why Trees Fly. I don't know where to start, says the girl, gripping the stick of her pencil over the blank paper. We've just come back from a walk along the creek, this girl with hair the color of summer pine duff and her classmates and I, looking for things to say about trees. They're like bushy bushes, she writes, pausing. That doesn't quite capture the essence somehow, but what more is there to say? I ask if she has one at home in the yard. At this, she brightens a little. I live in an orchard, she says. And I watch as her whole face softens with relief. She picks up her pencil and writes, I live in an orchard. Orchards have apple blossoms. They are like bushy bushes. I move on to a boy with his head on his desk. He throws me a challenging look. I don't want to write about real trees, he says. I want to write about trees that fly. Okay, I say, and leave him to it. Why trees fly, he writes, is a question I can't answer, but here they go. Can I make my trees talk? Asks a small girl with glitter on her forehead. Who says they don't? I toss back. Talking trees, she writes. The plum tree says to the apple tree, the wind is coming, coming, coming. The apple tree says to the pear tree, the moon is here, please welcome it. Where is your poem about trees, everyone wants to know, when we sit down in the circle to share? Outside the classroom window, the cherry lets fall a last scrap of blossom before pulling up and away over the playing fields, its roots dangling down just at arm's reach. I'm going to read two more short-ish new ones, and then a last poem from the book. This is the one that you have on the broadside, thanks to the Milwaukie Poetry Series. Eating the Pear. A fullness comes, pure and fine as December sun, delicate and undeniable. I clear the table, smooth out a cloth, lean in to warm my lips, the juice of my mouth making ready for the ripe pear. Outside, a fluttering above the grass. Pale lemon-winged, a butterfly hovers, lands, turns with a sudden gust into a faint petal from last summer's rose. Take, eat, says the fruit. My body is yours. This poem is the last one I'm going to read from the new series, is from inspired by a painting by Morris Graves, the 20th century Seattle expressionist painter. If you don't know him, look him up. He's wonderful. I went with my poetry class this spring with Robin, who's there in the back, to the Portland Art Museum, where we did some writing to paintings. This painting is actually at the Seattle Art Museum, but there is a painting by Morris Graves called something like, he has a series of bird paintings, wonderful bird paintings, and this one is something like the bird is tired of so much rain. I bought the postcard, and I'm going to send it to everyone in around May when we're all super tired of rain. So this is called Bird Experiencing Light, from a painting by Morris Graves. I was given no clearance. I landed where I landed and started right off warbling, a surprise even to myself. And what I sang was true to precisely no one but me and the whole of us at the same time. It's been ages since I felt a desire, but sound has to travel. This is simply universal law. No need to pretend. If you are light, you travel faster. I didn't write this song, but I live in the blossoming tree it has made. So I'm going to end with the poem at the end of the book called 7 Days. It's 7 short pieces, and even though there are numbers in the book, I just prefer to pause between sections. So 7 days. Take right now, for instance, sky clearing after rain, steam rising off the ferns growing lushly in the field, where last month they lay mown to the nibs an ocean unreachable but near. I am one of those getting just what I want. In the space of a single afternoon, I have managed to accomplish nothing of consequence. Through the open door, the faint smell of corn on moldering sheaves. There is nothing to keep me from sitting here breathing it in, so I do, along with a thrush's song and a child's distant cry, weightless rumor sifting down the long spout of the windpipe into my innermost body. Blue indigo of early morning lost to the heavy gray of 8 o'clock. I sneeze once into my empty teacup. The kitten gallops off. The house floats loose, washed clean of sound. Kitten returns, heart slowed, bats my wriggling pen, pen of rumor, palm of torn paper, pen of blunder, hand of forgiveness. Lead me past the fog, carry me into the grove, so I may leave this offering before I warm my small cup and enter the mysterious cloister of a grapefruit. What do we have here? Buttered toast, with squirrels rustling in the cypress, a day no sooner started than ending. Have you learned nothing from the crows? Hardly an hour goes by without 6 alarms, but the wind dusting a crumb from the desk, the wind has maybe taught you too well on its way out the door. From this paper I write upon, how many removes is the skin of my own parched hand? What animates this hand dry from spring digging? The still small form of my son, how strong is it really? How vital his vegetable heart under its trellis of delicate ribs? Do we exceed the stuff of which we are made, to which we so eagerly return? Mourning a cry in the blood, though nothing grows, this from the liver. The feet ask, do they really belong in this world? The heart answers, you must since you suffer. Whatever will I feed a whole city, the mouth wonders. Roads impassable, says the cortex, find alternate routes. Deliver me, the blood cries. Cut it out, says the liver. Remember me, bones, as you rise. And so I have lasted another winter. Do not hold it against me, darkness, for I am still your creature, though my pitiable body can't help itself, begging for always more light, even up to the last day's last hour. Thank you so much. So I could answer a few questions. Could try. Yes.
What made
Maya.
you want to become a writer?
What made me want to become
Or,
a writer?
what inspired you?
Yeah. Well, you know, I grew up in the woods, and I think that was it. I really do. When you grow up as the minority, life form, you become an animist. You see life everywhere, and you want to participate in that kind of expressive life out there. And I think there's all kinds of different ways to become a writer. Reading other writers who turn you on to literature, that was part of it too. Having great teachers, all the way through school, teachers who inspired me to read, inspired me to tell the truth. But trees were a really formative influence. I moved to Vermont when I was 4, and before that I'd lived in the city, and so I was really terrified of nature at first. I was terrified of the trees, the sounds they would make at night in the shadows, and but that fear turned into awe after a while, and that never went away.
And then why did you select Italian literature at that time?
Oh.
It was like
Yeah.
a favorite little niche.
Yeah, it was. It was kind of a circuitous route. I had an aunt who lived in Rome, an American aunt, and I went to visit her once, and it was my first experience, traveling on my own and speaking a language, and I just loved everything about it. And again, the expressiveness. Italians are incredibly expressive with their whole bodies in their language, and I think that just really appealed to me. And then the poetry is so beautiful. But I didn't really know what I was doing getting into that as a. I just kind of thought I should go to graduate school. I don't know why. What a waste of. I could have done it better later in life when I knew more what I wanted. So I haven't used it much. I haven't done any translating in particular, but.
How long did you study Italian? How old were you when you started?
I was 17 when I first went there, and then I studied it in college, and then through graduate school. So it was probably about 10 years.
Did you find the grammar challenging or not?
It's much easier than English. It's much more straightforward.
Easier to pronounce too,
Yeah,
because every letter tells you what you have to say.
right. Wouldn't that be nice?
It's not lot and not and all the rest of it.
Right, yeah.
Have you been back to Italy?
Not in 20-some years, yeah.
You
Yeah.
find a lot of changes.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure I would.
What's your writing practice?
Ah.
When you write?
It's the question.
When you have
Well, I appreciate that question, and I know, for years that was my foremost question for writers. I think everyone has to find their own way, and there's a little bit, I recognize in myself a little bit of a tendency to look at other writers and want to know what they do so that then I can try to do it and see if it works better for me or something. And really, I think if you focus too much on that, you're a little too wrapped up in sort of your self-concept of what a writer is. And really, you just, to me, it's about your relationship with life, and life comes and goes and has ups and downs, and sometimes I write every day and sometimes I don't. I'm not the most disciplined, I guess you could say, writer. Stanley Kunitz, who is one of my big faves, said the poet's job is to develop the self who writes the poems. So I feel like I spend most of my life doing that, some of my life writing poems. My practice is I write in my journal, and then I mine it every once in a while, harvest it kind of for poems. And some of the poems, like the series that I just read, those were 7 different poems that were kind of little pieces. And then I realized they were the same poem. That happens a lot. Yeah.
Do you find sometimes that your mind kind of creates the idea of a poem, or it works anyway, even though you're not writing it down? Your mind is writing something.
Yes,
Fills
absolutely.
you up, and you have to get it out then.
Absolutely. And that's kind of that poem about sleep eating, to me, that's what that's about. You know, there's something going on that we are just not conscious of or aware of, kind of working in our minds.
We're always really working and we're always really writing.
Yeah, yeah. But you do, you know, you do have to sit down and
Oh, yes.
kind of put it on
Lots of
paper
us never
eventually.
do.
But there's a lot of work that goes on without our, without effort, you know? Yeah. Thank you very much.